All right, strap in, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into some serious philosophical waters. We're talking Aristotle's logic. But hold on, because we're going way beyond your typical intro-level stuff here. This is, well, think of it as a deep dive, especially for those of you who really, really love to geek out on philosophy.
You know, it's amazing how Aristotle's work on logic, it was basically the authority for centuries. Like, even Kant, the giant of philosophy, well, he believed that for like 2,000 years after Aristotle, nothing really new had been added.
Yeah, it really is mind-blowing, isn't it, how much influence he had. But here's the thing. Here's where it gets even more interesting, is that modern logicians, they're actually finding all these unexpected, like, connections between the way Aristotle approached things and their own modern approaches to logic.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're both kind of looking at the same logical puzzle, but they're coming at it from these totally different angles.
I love that. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that connects them is that they both share this fascination with what's called meta theory, which is the study of the structure that underlies logical systems. Like they're both really, really interested in the why behind the what of logic.
Okay, I can already tell. This is going to be a good one.
Mm.
So let's get to it. We're going to be exploring the heart of Aristotle's logic, and we'll be focusing specifically on this idea he had called deduction. And now, you might think you know what deduction is, but the way Aristotle looked at it, well, it's got its own unique flavor. He actually defined it as, are you ready for this? Speech in which certain things having been supposed, something different from those supposed results of necessity because of their being so.
Right. So it's almost like you can think of it like a recipe. Like you start with certain ingredients, right? Those are your premises. And then because of how they work together, you just automatically end up with a certain dish in your conclusion, right? Because of the way things are set up.
Okay, that's a brilliant analogy. I love that. So it's like we've got our ingredients, they interact, and bam, we get a specific outcome. But here's the thing, right? Aristotle's definition, it doesn't quite match up perfectly with how we define validity in modern logic.
Yeah. So for example, he was really insistent that the conclusion had to be different from the premises, which isn't something that modern logic really requires for validity. And so this kind of suggests that, maybe Aristotle was actually more interested in something a bit closer to what we call relevance logic. That's where the conclusion has to be related to the premises in a very specific way. It can't just be like any consequence of them.
Okay, so just a little difference in definition, but potentially some huge EE implications.
Absolutely.
So before we really get lost in the weeds here, let's talk about induction for a sec. Because Aristotle saw that as a totally different type of argument, right? It's the kind of reasoning where you start with specific observations and then you work your way up to more general conclusions.
Yeah, yeah. Think of it like observing cats. Like you see a bunch of different cats, right? And you notice they all have four legs. And then from that, you kind of conclude, well, all cats have four legs.
Right. You see a pattern and go, aha,
Yeah,
that's how it is.
exactly. But even though Aristotle, he acknowledged induction, he wasn't super passionate about it. His real love, like his real jam, was definitely deduction.
Deduction all the way.
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that, like, even though it wasn't his favorite, induction still plays a pretty big role in his whole theory about scientific knowledge, right? Especially when it comes to establishing those foundational principles, those like starting points.
Yeah.
They can't really be proven through deduction itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so back to those deductions. Now, Aristotle believed that every statement, like any sentence that can be true or false, has two main parts to it: a subject and a predicate.
Right. Right. And this is where things get even deeper, I think, because Aristotle, he goes on to make this really important distinction between individual terms and universal terms. And for him, this wasn't just about grammar, right? It was about like the very nature of reality. Like when you say Socrates, that's an individual term, right? It's referring to a specific person. But when you say human, that's a universal term. It's referring to a whole category.
So like the specific versus the general.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just a matter of slapping any old predicate onto any old subject, right? Like, what about a sentence like, the person sitting down is Socrates?
Okay, so Aristotle wouldn't really count that as a genuine type of predication. He called those accidental predications because they kind of depend on a more fundamental relationship, like Socrates is sitting down. For Aristotle, the whole point of predication was about capturing these like essential truths, not just some temporary state.
Whoa, this is making me rethink how I even use language.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not just about describing random observations. It's about reflecting the actual, like, the true relationships that are out there in the world.
Exactly.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
And this whole idea, it ties in with another really crucial aspect of Aristotle's logic: affirmations, denials, and contradictions. He believed that for any contradiction, and by that he means like a pair of statements where one affirms something and the other one denies it, right? Well, he believed that one of them has to be true and the other one has to be false.
Oh, like the cat is on the mat versus the cat is not on the mat.
Yeah.
They can't both be true at the same time.
Exactly. But then it gets kind of tricky, because what about those situations where, we don't actually know what the truth is yet? Like when we're talking about, future events, could those be like exceptions to this rule?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually where things get really, really interesting because Aristotle, he kind of hints at the idea that there might be some exceptions when it comes to future events. And that opens up a whole can of worms, really, about like the nature of time and possibility and even free will.
Okay, that is definitely something we're going to have to explore further down the line. But for now, let's stick with those basic building blocks of these deductions. All right. So we've got our subjects and predicates, but there's more to it than that, right? Because Aristotle recognized that there are all these different ways that a predicate can actually apply to a subject.
Right.
You mean like using words like all or some or none to kind of express how much that predicate applies. Exactly, exactly. And that's actually how we get all those different types of statements, like when you say all humans are mortal, that's what's called a universal affirmative. But when you say some humans are philosophers, that's a particular affirmative.
Right. So the wording really matters. Didn't he also come up with like that super famous square of opposition to kind of show how all these different statements relate to each other?
Yes, absolutely. So the square it's basically this visual representation of how all these different types of statements, they contradict each other or they support each other, right? It's like if you say no humans are mortal, well, that's the exact opposite of saying all humans are mortal.
Yeah, like they can't coexist peacefully.
Exactly. But the thing is that interpreting the square, it's actually sparked a ton of debate among scholars, because it's actually way more complex than it looks at first glance.
I can only imagine this stuff gets deep fast. So, okay, we've got our subjects, we've got our predicates, we've got these different types of statements, these affirmations and all that. So I think I'm ready for the next level. Hit me with it. What's next in this grand logical system?
All right, well, now it's time for Aristotle's theory of inferences, the syllogistic. This is where he really explored how we can combine all those categorical statements to draw brand new conclusions.
The syllogistic. Okay, I'm so ready. Lay it on me.
All right. So think of it like a puzzle, A syllogism, it's got two premises, and those premises share a middle term. And the conclusion, well, that links the other two terms together. So think of that super classic example. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So the middle term in that example, that's man.
Okay, so the middle term is like the key. It's what connects the two premises together and allows us to get to that conclusion. But you know what really blows my mind about all of this is that Aristotle, he didn't just describe these syllogisms. He actually like went and proved that they were valid.
Exactly. And he'd do it with some seriously impressive techniques, too. Like he would use conversion, where you swap the subject and the predicate of a statement, or he would use reduction, where you break down these really complex syllogisms into simpler forms that he'd already proven. And he even developed a whole method for proving that a syllogism was invalid by constructing, get this, by constructing counterexamples. So he'd find cases where the premises were true, but the conclusion turned out to be false.
Whoa, whoa. Counterexamples.
Yeah.
So it's like saying, hey, your argument might sound all fancy and logical, but here's a situation where it completely falls apart.
Exactly. Exactly. And guess what? That technique, it's still being used by logicians today.
Oh, wow. Talk about ahead of his time.
And Aristotle, he didn't stop there. He also went on to categorize all those different valid syllogisms based on their structure and the types of statements they use. And that's how we get all those fancy-sounding syllogistic moods like Barbara and Celerant and all the others.
Amazing. I mean, this was all happening like over 2,000 years ago. It's just incredible how sophisticated his system of logic was.
Absolutely. It truly is remarkable. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, man, if this is just scratching the surface, I can't wait to see what else we uncover.
Well, get ready, because things are about to get even more mind-bending when we dive into the world of modal logic.
Modal logic. All right, everybody, buckle up. We're going deep. All right, welcome back, everyone. So Last time, remember, we were exploring Aristotle's whole concept of deduction and how he, like, meticulously analyzed these things called syllogisms, which, let's be real, they can be pretty mind-bending.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They're like the building blocks of how we reason, you know.
Exactly. But hold on tight, because we're about to go even deeper down the rabbit hole. We're going to explore, are you ready for this? Modal logic.
Oh, yeah, modal logic.
It sounds intense, like something Spock would be into. So what is it exactly? And, like, why did Aristotle think it was so important?
Okay, so imagine you take our logical statements, right? And you start adding words like necessarily and possibly. That's basically modal logic in a nutshell. It's not just about what's true or false anymore. It's about what must be true or what could be true.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see how that adds a whole other layer of complexity to things. So instead of just saying, like, all birds can fly, we can now say, necessarily, some birds cannot fly.
Exactly. And Aristotle, he realized that these modal qualifiers, necessarily, possibly, and possibly, they actually have a big impact on whether our inferences are valid or not. He wanted to understand how they change the way we do deductions.
So did he basically just take all those syllogisms we talked about and, like, start sticking modal terms onto them?
Pretty much. He systematically went through and explored, like, what happens to the validity of all these different syllogisms when you add modal terms to the premises or to the conclusion. For example, that classic syllogism, Barbara, it's always valid in its, like, standard form, right? So if you add necessarily to the premises and the conclusion, you should still end up with a valid modal syllogism, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. If something's necessarily true, like adding necessarily shouldn't change that, right?
Right, exactly. But Aristotle didn't just assume that was the case. He actually went through and provided, proofs for all these modal syllogisms, and he often modeled them after his proofs for the non-modal versions. But things get a lot trickier when you start, mixing and matching these different modalities. Like, what happens when you've got, like, one premise that's necessary and another premise that's only possible?
I'm going to guess that's where things get really interesting
Yeah.
and maybe a little controversial.
You got it. And this is where people's interpretations of Aristotle's modal logic, it can really start to diverge. Remember how we were talking about how Aristotle defined possibly as neither necessary nor impossible? Well, that definition, it leads to some pretty unique consequences when it comes to modal conversions. That's where you flip a statement around, you swap the subject and the predicate.
Oh, right, right. The conversions, like taking a statement and basically turning it inside out.
Exactly. So with these possible premises, Aristotle, he argues that possibly A actually implies possibly not A. So if you have a statement like, possibly all philosophers are wise, that would imply possibly no philosophers are wise.
Wait a minute. Those sound like they contradict each other. How can both of those be possibly true?
Well, that's the thing. That's what happens when you use Aristotle's very specific definition of possibility. If something is possible, it means it's not necessary and it's not impossible, right? So that means that both the statement and its opposite, they could both potentially be true.
Wow, my brain is doing backflips trying to wrap itself around this.
Yeah.
So how does all of this actually play out when you start combining these modal premises into real syllogisms?
Well, Aristotle, he went through and he explored tons of different combinations, but one of the most famous and debated examples is this thing called the two Barbaras problem. It involves two Barbara syllogisms, but they both have one necessary premise and one what's called an assertoric premise. So in one version, it's the major premise that's necessary, and the other version, it's the minor premise that's necessary. And the crazy thing is that Aristotle, he accepts the first one as valid, but he rejects the second one.
Hold on a second. If they both have the same types of premises, like why would one be okay and the other one not? That doesn't seem fair.
I know, right? It's a real head scratcher. And scholars have been debating this like for centuries. Aristotle's reasoning for it is super intricate, and it relies on, his very specific definitions of all those modal terms and his whole concept of essential predication. And even some of his own, like, followers, guys like Theophrastus, they disagreed with him. They actually proposed a much simpler rule where the modality of the conclusion, it should always match the weakest modality in the premises.
So if one premise is necessary and the other one is just like regular assertoric, then the conclusion can only be assertoric as well. It's like the conclusion can't be stronger than its weakest link.
Exactly. But that's not how Aristotle saw it. And this is really just, the tip of the iceberg when it comes to all the complexities and the interpretive challenges of his modal logic. Modern logicians have spent a ton of time trying to like reconstruct and make sense of it all, and the debates are still going strong today.
Wow, okay, so modal logic definitely adds a whole new level of depth and nuance to Aristotle's system, even if it does lead to some serious philosophical head-scratching. But let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about how Aristotle actually applied all these logical concepts to something that we all care about, knowledge and science.
Yeah, so Aristotle, he believed that true knowledge, it's not just about, having beliefs, it's about understanding the why behind those beliefs. And that's where his idea of demonstrations comes in.
So it's not enough to just know that something is true, you need to know the reasons why it's true.
Exactly. For Aristotle, a demonstration, it's a special type of deduction that produces like genuine knowledge. It's like a logical proof that leads you to a conclusion that you can be absolutely certain about.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes a demonstration different from like any other kind of deduction? Are there like special rules for putting them together?
Oh, definitely. Aristotle laid out some very specific conditions for the premises of a demonstration. So first of all, they have to be true, obviously, but they also have to be primary, immediate, better known than the conclusion, prior to the conclusion, and get this, causes of the conclusion. It's a pretty long checklist.
Whoa, that's a lot to unpack. Let's break it down a bit. So what does he mean by primary and immediate?
Okay, so those terms, they've actually caused quite a bit of debate among scholars, but immediate, it probably refers to propositions that can't be broken down into like simpler statements. They're like the bedrock of our knowledge, those starting points where everything else comes from. And then primary probably means like logically prior, so they don't depend on any other propositions for their truth.
Okay, so these immediate and primary premises, they're like the foundation of everything we know. And then from there, we can kind of build up to more complex understandings through these demonstrations. But here's a question that's been bugging me. How do we even know that those foundational premises are actually true in the first place? Like, if they can't be demonstrated, how can we be so sure about them?
That is the million-dollar question. And it actually leads to this classic philosophical problem that Aristotle really wrestled with, the regress
The
problem.
regress problem. Okay, that sounds ominous. What is that exactly, and how did Aristotle even try to solve it?
So imagine you're trying to demonstrate a conclusion, right? Well, you need premises to do that, right? But then how do you know those premises are true? Well, you'd have to demonstrate them too, which would require even more premises and so on and so on. It's like an endless staircase of proofs.
It's like trying to find the bottom of a bottomless pit. It seems like either the process just goes on forever, which means our knowledge has no solid foundation, or it has to stop somewhere, which means that our ultimate starting points are just assumptions.
Exactly. You've got it. That's the dilemma. And Aristotle knew that he needed to find a way out of this infinite regress. He rejected the idea of what's called circular demonstration, where the premises are also conclusions, because he thought that was just incoherent. So he proposed a different solution. He said that there must be another way of knowing those first principles, a way that doesn't rely on demonstration at all.
Okay, I am officially on the edge of my seat. What is this other magical way of knowing? Did Aristotle think that we're just like born with this knowledge or something?
No, he wasn't saying that we're born with like a preloaded encyclopedia in our heads. Instead, he introduced this concept of nous, which is often translated as insight or intuition. It's like this special faculty of the mind that allows us to just grasp those first principles directly without needing a whole chain of logical proofs.
So it's like a sudden flash of understanding, an aha moment.
Yeah, in a way, Aristotle, he actually compared the development of nous to how our senses develop naturally. Like, we don't have to learn to see colors, right? We have this innate capacity for it. And when we encounter a color, we just exercise that capacity.
So we're born with the potential to understand these first principles, and then through experience, that potential gets activated. It's like our minds are primed to recognize those fundamental truths.
Exactly. That's the general idea. Aristotle suggested that, through all our experiences and observations, our minds, they're able to abstract those universal principles that govern reality. It's a process of moving from the specific to the general, from the better known for us to the better known in itself.
Okay, so we start with these perceptions, we build up memories, then we form like more general experiences, and then finally, through nous, we arrive at those fundamental, like undemonstrable principles that are the bedrock of scientific knowledge.
Wow. But even if we can, like, grasp those first principles through now, how do we actually express them clearly? Like, how can we be sure that we're all talking about the same things when we discuss all these really complex concepts?
That's where Aristotle's emphasis on definitions comes in. He believed that definitions are absolutely crucial for capturing the essence of things, and for making sure that we can communicate clearly, in our scientific and philosophical endeavors. But that, my friend, is a conversation for next time. Oh, man, you're killing me with the cliffhanger. But all right, folks, you heard it here. We're going to be unraveling the mysteries of definitions next time. And we'll also be delving into the difference between dialectic and demonstration. And hey, maybe we'll even tackle that mind-boggling sea battle puzzle. So don't miss it. Welcome back, philosophy fans. All right, so last time, remember we were talking about nous, that special intuitive faculty that helps us grasp those fundamental principles of knowledge, the ones that we can't prove through, like step-by-step deductions.
Right, right. Like those starting points, those building blocks of knowledge.
Exactly. But then the question became, like, okay, but how do we actually pin down those principles? How do we express them clearly so that everyone's on the same page? And that's where, remember, definitions come in.
Yeah. And for Aristotle, definitions, they weren't just about like clearing up the meaning of words. They were about capturing the essence of something, like what it really is at its core.
So it's like a blueprint that reveals like the fundamental nature of a thing, right?
Exactly. And he was, really influenced by Plato's idea of forms, those eternal, unchanging blueprints of reality.
Right, like the ideal version of a thing.
Right. But unlike Plato, Aristotle didn't believe that these essences were like separate from the world, floating around in some abstract realm. For him, essences were right here, like embedded in the things themselves.
Oh, okay. So it's not like these essences are off in some other dimension. They're actually part of the world around us.
Exactly.
So to define something, we have to get to the heart of what makes it, well, what it is. So is there like a method, a formula for coming up with a good, a good Aristotelian definition?
Well, Aristotle believed that the best definitions, they have a really specific structure. They identify the genus, which is like the broader category that something belongs to, and then the differentia, which is what sets it apart from everything else in that category.
Oh, okay. So like if we're defining a human, the genus would be animal, right? Because humans are animals.
Yeah.
And then the differentia would be something like rational or like capable of reason. It's like saying, okay, a human is an animal, but what makes it a human is its ability to reason.
Exactly. And this whole approach to definition, it highlights this super important concept for Aristotle, which is called essential predication. And it's all about identifying those predicates that express like the very essence of a thing, right? Like the answers to the question, what is it?
So Socrates is human would be an essential predication because human tells us like fundamentally what Socrates is at his core. But Socrates is sitting, that wouldn't be an essential predication because that's just, a temporary state. It's not who he is deep down.
Exactly. Essential predication, it's all about, avoiding getting lost in all the accidental attributes, those things that might be true about something, but they don't really tell us what it is. And this ties back to Aristotle's categories, those fundamental ways that we categorize things and make statements about them. Substance, quantity, quality, relation, all those categories, they provide this framework for understanding all the different ways that things can be, and therefore all the different ways that we can define them.
It's like Aristotle was creating a logical filing system for the whole universe.
Yeah, pretty much.
But wait a minute. Didn't it get that whole method of division from Plato? For figuring out definitions, I mean.
Right.
The one where you keep dividing these broader categories into smaller and smaller ones until you finally get to the specific thing you're trying to define.
Yeah, he did. And while Aristotle saw some value in it, as a way of organizing knowledge, he wasn't really a fan of using it as the primary way to actually establish definitions. He thought it could sometimes lead to circular reasoning, and that it often just assumed the very thing it was trying to define in the first place.
Ah, okay. So division might be a helpful tool for exploring different concepts and stuff, but it's not like a foolproof method for creating these really solid, rock solid definitions.
Exactly. And this actually brings us to another really key distinction that Aristotle makes: dialectic versus demonstration.
Yes.
A showdown.
Right. So both of them, they involve, argumentation. But the difference is all in the types of premises that they use.
Okay, remind me again what that difference is. Demonstrations use those true and primary premises, right? The ones that lead to genuine knowledge. Yes, exactly. Demonstrations, they're all about aiming for those, those rock-solid, unshakable conclusions. Dialectical arguments, on the other hand, they start from premises that are, generally accepted or what are called in doxa.
Yeah.
And they're more about like exploring different perspectives and testing ideas through this really rigorous back and forth.
So it's kind of like a philosophical sparring match where the goal isn't necessarily to like win, but to refine your understanding through arguing and debating.
Exactly. It's like this vital tool for philosophical inquiry.
I love that. So it's not about like one side being right and the other being wrong. It's about, using the process of argumentation to get closer to the truth.
Exactly. And speaking of thought-provoking arguments, how about we finally tackle that infamous sea battle puzzle? It's where Aristotle really gets tangled up with, with time and necessity and the truth of statements about the future.
Oh, yes, the sea battle puzzle. Okay, so for everyone listening, it's the one where we imagine someone saying, like, there will be a sea battle tomorrow. And that statement, it feels like it has to be either true or false right now, even though the battle hasn't happened yet.
Right. The problem is that if the statement is true right now, doesn't that mean that the sea battle is, like, inevitable? Like, it has to happen.
Yeah, it kind of feels like we're saying that the future is already set in stone and we're just, like, helpless bystanders.
Yeah, and that didn't really sit well with Aristotle's whole idea about potentiality and how, how things can be in these multiple possible states before they actually become real.
Right. So what did he do? How did he get out of this mess?
Well, Aristotle, he proposed that statements about future contingent events, those things that might or might not happen, they don't actually have a definite truth value right now. They're not true or false until the event actually happens or doesn't happen.
Oh, okay, I see. So there will be a sea battle tomorrow. That's neither true nor false until tomorrow actually arrives, and then we see what goes down. It's like the truth of the statement is like suspended in time, waiting for the event to unfold.
Yeah, that's one way to interpret it. But like a lot of things with Aristotle, this whole passage has been the subject of tons of debate among scholars. Some people think that he's like hinting at a three-valued logic, or even that these kinds of statements have like truth value gaps.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. But it does highlight how logic isn't just about these dry abstract rules, right? It grapples with these really deep, profound questions about time and possibility and even nature of truth itself. And to think, Aristotle was wrestling with these questions over 2,000 years ago.
It's incredible, isn't it? And you know what? His ideas, they're still relevant today. We've only, explored a tiny fraction of his whole logical system, but hopefully you can see how it's this really foundational system of Western thought, and it has implications that go way beyond just formal logic.
Absolutely. From definitions to deductions, from modal logic to the mysteries of time and truth, Aristotle really laid the groundwork for how we think and how we reason. So to all you philosophy fans out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Who knows what amazing insights you might uncover.